I was 71 years old when my son told me I was nothing more than an employee, expendable and replaceable, in the company I had built from the ground up with my own 2 hands and 30 years of sleepless nights. The words came through the speakerphone in his corner office, cold and mechanical, as if he were reading from a script someone else had written. "Hand over the source code, Mom, or you're done here." I remember staring at the polished mahogany desk between us, seeing my own reflection distorted in its surface, and thinking how strange it was that the child I had carried, nursed, and sacrificed everything for could look at me with such casual indifference. My name is Eleanor Grant, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones you loved without question, and how I discovered that protecting yourself is not selfish, it is survival. I live in Portland, Oregon, in a modest craftsman house in the Laurelhurst neighborhood, the same house my late husband Thomas and I bought in 1981 when we were young and full of dreams. The neighborhood has changed over the years, become wealthier, more polished, but my house remains the same. White paint, green shutters, a front porch where I drink my coffee every morning and watch the maple trees change with the seasons. Thomas died 8 years ago from a sudden heart attack, leaving me alone with our 2 children, Marcus and Sophie, and a small software consulting business we had started together in our garage back in 1989. Thomas had been the business mind, the one who talked to clients and closed deals, while I was the engineer, the one who stayed up until 3 in the morning writing code, debugging systems, building solutions that no one else could build. After he died, I thought the business would die too. But Marcus, who had just finished his MBA at Stanford, came home and said he wanted to take over. He said he wanted to honor his father's legacy, wanted to make me proud, wanted to turn our small consulting firm into something bigger. I believed him because he was my son, because I had raised him to be honest and kind, because I thought family meant something. For the first 2 years after Marcus took over as CEO, things were good. He brought in new clients, expanded our services, hired a team of young developers who looked up to me as the company's technical founder. Sophie, my daughter, had moved to Boston to teach literature at a small college, and she would call me every Sunday to check in, to ask how things were going with Marcus and the business. I would tell her everything was fine, that Marcus was doing a wonderful job, that I was so proud of how he had grown into a leader. I didn't tell her about the small things I had started to notice. The way Marcus would cut me off in meetings, the way he would introduce me to investors as our former CTO, even though I was still writing most of the code. The way his new wife Vanessa would smile at me with a coldness that felt like winter frost. Vanessa had come into Marcus's life 3 years ago, a corporate lawyer from New York with sharp suits and sharper ambitions, and from the moment they married, I felt the temperature in my own company begin to drop. She would sit in on strategy meetings, whispering things into Marcus's ear, and I would watch my son's face change, harden, become someone I didn't recognize. But I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid, that Marcus loved me and would never hurt me. The turning point came last spring when Marcus announced we had secured a major contract with a Fortune 500 tech company to develop a proprietary enterprise software platform. The contract was worth $8 million, more money than we had ever seen, and Marcus said this was our chance to become something real, something significant. He asked me to lead the development, to build the system from scratch, and I said yes because this was what I had been doing my entire life. Solving impossible problems, creating elegant solutions, turning ideas into reality. I worked 16-hour days for 6 months straight, barely sleeping, barely eating, living on coffee and determination. I built an architecture that was scalable, secure, and revolutionary, incorporating machine learning algorithms I had been developing privately for years, features that could predict system failures before they happened, optimize resource allocation in real time, and integrate seamlessly with legacy infrastructure. The client was thrilled, called it a game changer, said it was exactly what they needed and more. Within 3 months of deployment, Word spread through the industry, and we started getting inquiries from other major corporations. Marcus hired a valuation firm, and they came back with a number that made my head spin. The company was now worth $1.2 billion, primarily because of the software I had built. That was when everything changed. Marcus called a board meeting, a board that now included Vanessa, two venture capitalists who had invested in our expansion, and a CFO Marcus had brought in from Silicon Valley. I wasn't invited to the meeting, which should have been my first warning. But Marcus assured me it was just financial planning, nothing technical, nothing that required my input. 2 days later, he called me into his office, the one that used to be Thomas's, the one that still had our wedding photo on the shelf, though I noticed it had been moved to a less prominent position, half hidden behind a stack of business books. Marcus sat behind the desk, Vanessa standing beside him like a sentinel, and he slid a document across the mahogany surface toward me. "We need you to sign this," he said, his voice flat, businesslike. I picked up the document and started reading. It was a transfer agreement, a legal document stating that all intellectual property I had created during my time at the company, including the proprietary software platform, would be assigned exclusively to the corporation, with no residual rights, no ownership stake, no acknowledgement of individual contribution. In exchange, I would receive a one-time payment of $50,000 and the title of Technical Advisor Emeritus, which essentially meant I would have no authority, no decision-making power, and no equity in the company I had built. I looked up at Marcus, searching his face for some sign of the boy I had raised, the child who used to climb into my lap when he was scared, who would ask me to explain how computers worked, who once told me I was the smartest person he knew. "This can't be real," I said, my voice shaking. "Marcus, I built that software. I own the intellectual property rights. Your father and I established the company with clear provisions about technical ownership." Marcus glanced at Vanessa, and she stepped forward, her smile cold and professional. "Actually, Eleanor, when Marcus restructured the company 3 years ago, all employees, including yourself, signed new employment agreements that included comprehensive IP assignment clauses. Everything you create while employed by this company belongs to the company. That's standard practice in the tech industry." I felt my chest tighten, felt the room start to spin. I never signed anything like that. I would never sign away my rights. Vanessa pulled out another document, this one with my signature at the bottom, dated 3 years ago. I stared at it, trying to remember, and then it came back to me. Marcus had brought me a stack of papers one afternoon, said they were just routine HR updates, insurance forms, benefits enrollment, nothing important. I had been in the middle of debugging a critical system, distracted, exhausted, and I had signed without reading carefully. My own son had tricked me. "This is not happening," I said, standing up, my hands trembling. "Marcus, this is wrong. You know this is wrong." My son looked at me with eyes that belonged to a stranger, cold and calculating. "Mom, this is business. The company has grown beyond what you can manage. We need to professionalize our operations, and that means consolidating ownership and control. You'll still be compensated. You'll still have a role, but we need clear lines of authority." I shook my head, feeling tears burn behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "And if I don't sign?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, folding his hands across his chest in a gesture that reminded me painfully of his father, except Thomas would never have used that posture as a weapon. "Then we'll have to consider whether your continued employment is beneficial to the company. We have lawyers, Mom. We have documentation. We'll win, and you'll lose everything, including your reputation. Or you can sign this, take the payment, and maintain your dignity. Your choice." I walked out of that office feeling like I had been gutted, like someone had reached into my chest and torn out my heart while it was still beating. I drove home in a daze, barely seeing the road, and when I got to my house, I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, unable to move, unable to think. Sophie called that evening, her Sunday check-in, and I almost told her everything, but something stopped me. Pride, maybe, or shame, or the irrational hope that this was all a mistake, that Marcus would come to his senses and apologize. Instead, I told her work was busy, that everything was fine, and I heard the doubt in her voice, but she didn't push. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by 3 decades of memories, photos of Thomas and me at our first office, pictures of Marcus and Sophie as children, awards and certifications and patents with my name on them. And I tried to understand how I had arrived at this moment. I had given everything to my family, to my work, to building something meaningful, and now I was being discarded like outdated hardware, obsolete and inconvenient. For 3 days, I didn't respond to Marcus's demand. He sent emails, increasingly terse, and Vanessa left voicemails reminding me of deadlines and legal consequences. On the 4th day, Marcus showed up at my house unannounced, walking in without knocking like he still lived there, finding me in the study where I kept my personal computer and all my private files. "Mom, this is getting ridiculous," he said, his tone edged with irritation. "You need to sign the agreement. The board is getting impatient, and we have potential buyers circling. This company could be worth $2 billion if we play this right, but we need clean IP rights. You're holding everything up." I looked at my son, this man who shared my DNA but seemed to have inherited none of my values, and I felt something inside me shift, harden, crystallize into a cold clarity I had never experienced before. "You're right," I said quietly. "This is ridiculous. I'll sign." Marcus blinked, surprised by my sudden acquiescence. "Good. That's good, Mom. You're doing the right thing." He pulled out the document, the same one from his office, already notarized and ready for my signature. I took the pen he offered, and I signed my name on the line, watching the ink dry, watching my son's face relax into something like relief. "Thank you," he said, and for a moment I thought I heard a trace of genuine gratitude, but it was gone so quickly I decided I had imagined it. "I'll also need you to transfer the source code," he added. "Full repository access, documentation, everything. We need to ensure business continuity." I nodded slowly. "Of course. Give me until tomorrow. I'll send everything over." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my computer, staring at lines of code I had written over months of exhausting work, and I made a decision that would change everything. See, what Marcus didn't know, what no one knew except me, was that I had never stopped being careful, never stopped protecting myself, even when I thought I didn't need to. Years ago, Thomas had taught me something important about business. Always have leverage, always have an exit, always build in protections that others can't see. When I developed the proprietary software platform, I had embedded several things into the code that Marcus and his lawyers would never find unless they knew exactly what to look for. First, there was a timestamp verification system that required periodic authentication from my personal server, a security feature I had pitched as protecting against unauthorized distribution, but which actually gave me a kill switch if I ever needed it. Second, I had written the core algorithms in a way that depended on a proprietary library I had developed independently, years before joining the restructured company, library that was legally mine under intellectual property law because it predated my employment agreement. Third, and most importantly, I had included a legally binding ownership clause embedded in the software's licensing metadata, a clause that stated, "Ownership of this software and all derivative works reverts to original creator upon breach of ethical business practices or violation of original development agreement terms as determined by independent arbitration." I spent that entire night preparing my response. I packaged the source code exactly as Marcus had requested, complete and functional, and I uploaded it to the company's repository with a detailed transfer email. But I also did something else. I contacted 3 people, my own lawyer, Martin Chen, an intellectual property specialist I had known for 20 years, Thomas's old business partner, Richard Malloy, who had retired from tech but still maintained connections throughout the industry, and a forensic accountant named Patricia Winters, who had helped me organize Thomas's estate. I gave each of them specific instructions, specific documents, specific evidence I had been collecting for months. Emails from Marcus discussing his plans to phase out my involvement, financial records showing how the company's valuation was based almost entirely on my software, and most damning, a recording from a board meeting where Vanessa explicitly stated that they needed to secure the IP before Eleanor realizes what she's sitting on. I had recorded it on my phone, which I had left running in my purse during a meeting I wasn't supposed to attend. And while I felt guilty about the deception, I felt more betrayed by the necessity of it. 2 days after I transferred the source code, my phone started ringing. The first call came at 6 in the morning, Marcus's number flashing on my screen. I didn't answer. By noon I had 15 missed calls. By evening, 99. The voicemails started out confused, then angry, then panicked. "Mom, call me back. This is serious." "What the hell did you do?" "Our lawyers found something in the code. We need to talk. Now." I listened to each voicemail once, then deleted it, feeling nothing except a strange sense of calm. On the third day, Vanessa called from her personal cell, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Eleanor, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but you are making a serious mistake. We have legal rights to that software. You signed the agreement." I broke my silence and answered, "I did sign the agreement," I said pleasantly, "and I did transfer the source code, exactly as requested. Is there a problem?" There was a long pause, and I could hear papers rustling, voices arguing in the background. "There's a clause embedded in the software license," Vanessa said finally. "Something about ownership reverting upon breach of ethical practices. What exactly does that mean?" I smiled, even though she couldn't see me. "It means exactly what it says, Vanessa. When you and Marcus coerced me into signing away my rights through fraud and misrepresentation, you breached the ethical business practices provision. The ownership clause is now active, and according to the terms I embedded in the original development agreement, the one I filed with the Copyright Office 6 months ago before Marcus's restructuring, all rights to the software revert to me pending independent arbitration." The silence on the other end was deafening. "You can't do this," Vanessa said, her voice rising. "That clause isn't legally binding. You were an employee. We own everything you created." I had anticipated this argument, had spent 3 sleepless nights with Martin preparing my response. "Actually, Vanessa, the core algorithms that make the software valuable are based on a proprietary library I developed in 2015, 3 years before Marcus restructured the company and long before I signed your fraudulent employment agreement. That library is my intellectual property, registered and copyrighted under my name alone. The software you're trying to claim ownership of is essentially a derivative work of my original creation. Without my library, your software is useless. And as of this morning, I've revoked the company's license to use that library." Another pause, longer this time, and I could hear Marcus's voice in the background, shouting something I couldn't make out. "We'll sue you," Vanessa said, but her voice had lost its edge, replaced by something closer to desperation. "We'll take everything you have." I felt that cold clarity settle over me again, that strange new strength I had discovered in betrayal. "You can try," I said quietly. "But I have documentation of everything. Emails showing how you manipulated me into signing documents under false pretenses. Recordings of board meetings where you discussed cutting me out. Financial records proving that the company's entire valuation is based on my work. And I have witnesses, including your own investors, who will testify that Marcus misrepresented the ownership structure when he sought their funding. So please, Vanessa, sue me. I'd love to see how that plays out in court, with the press watching, with your potential buyers watching, with everyone seeing how you and my son stole from a 71-year-old woman who built the very thing you're trying to claim." I hung up before she could respond, and I turned off my phone. The missed calls continued to accumulate I could see them piling up when I checked my messages later that evening. 999 calls from Marcus, from Vanessa, from their lawyers, from board members, from investors. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I met with Martin, Patricia, and Richard, and we began the process of formal arbitration. Under the terms I had embedded in the software license, disputes over ownership had to be resolved through binding arbitration rather than litigation, a provision that heavily favored individual creators over corporations. I had chosen the arbitration clause specifically for this reason, had buried it deep in the technical documentation where lawyers wouldn't think to look, and now it was my shield against the very people who had tried to destroy me. The arbitration hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later, and during that time, I learned things about my son that broke my heart in ways I hadn't thought possible. Patricia's investigation revealed that Marcus had been planning to force me out for over a year, that he and Vanessa had specifically waited until after I finished the proprietary software before executing their plan. She found emails between Marcus and a venture capital firm discussing how to minimize the founder's role and consolidate equity among key stakeholders. Richard discovered that Marcus had been shopping the company to potential acquirers, pitching the software as his own creation, never mentioning my name except as a legacy employee who would be transitioned out post-acquisition. Most painfully, I found text messages between Marcus and Vanessa where my son referred to me as the obstacle and dead weight, discussing how to neutralize her influence before I realized what the software was worth. Reading those messages felt like dying, like watching my child turn into someone capable of cruelty I had never imagined. And I wondered where I had gone wrong, what I had failed to teach him, how he had learned to see his own mother as an enemy to be defeated. Sophie found out what was happening 3 weeks before the arbitration hearing. She called me after Marcus contacted her, trying to convince her to intervene on his behalf, to persuade me to drop my claim and stop tearing the family apart. My daughter listened to his pitch, then called me, her voice shaking with anger. "Mom, why didn't you tell me what he did to you?" I had been avoiding this conversation, dreading it, afraid that I would break down and lose the composure I had been maintaining like armor. "I didn't want to burden you," I said quietly. "I didn't want you to have to choose between your brother and me." Sophie made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Choose? Mom, there's no choice. What he did is unforgivable. He stole from you. He lied to you. He treated you like you were nothing after everything you gave him. Everything you built. I'm coming home. I'm testifying at the arbitration. He needs to face what he's done." I tried to talk her out of it, told her it wasn't necessary, but Sophie had inherited her father's stubbornness and my sense of justice. And 2 days later, she was on my doorstep with a suitcase and a determination that reminded me why I had fought so hard to raise strong, principled children, even if one of them had lost his way. The arbitration hearing took place in a conference room in downtown Portland, in a building with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Willamette River. Marcus arrived with Vanessa and a team of 3 lawyers, all in expensive suits, all carrying briefcases full of documents and arguments. I arrived with Martin, Sophie, and the truth. The arbitrator was a retired federal judge named Margaret Hawthorne, a woman in her late 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for cutting through corporate nonsense. She listened to Marcus's lawyers present their case, claims that I was a disgruntled employee trying to extort the company, arguments that my ownership clause was legally invalid, assertions that I had no right to the intellectual property I had created. Then Martin presented our evidence. He showed the copyright registration for my proprietary library, dated years before Marcus's restructuring. He presented the emails and recordings proving that Marcus and Vanessa had deliberately deceived me. Patricia testified about the financial analysis, showing that without my software, the company's valuation would collapse to almost nothing. Sophie testified about Marcus's character, about how he had changed after meeting Vanessa, about conversations where he had dismissed our father's legacy and called me outdated and irrelevant. And then I testified. I sat across from the arbitrator, with Marcus and Vanessa staring at me from the other side of the table. and I told my story. I explained how I had built this company with Thomas, how we had started with nothing but ideas and determination, how I had spent 30 years writing code, solving problems, creating value. I described how Marcus had asked me to trust him, how he had promised to honor his father's legacy, how I had believed him because he was my son, and I thought family meant something. I detailed the months of work I had put into the proprietary software, the sleepless nights, the health I had sacrificed, the passion I had poured into every line of code. And then I explained how Marcus had betrayed me, how he had tricked me into signing away my rights, how he had planned to erase me from the very company I had built, how he had referred to me as dead weight and an obstacle in his private communications. I didn't cry as I spoke. I had cried enough in private, and now I needed to be strong, needed to show that I was not a victim to be pitied, but a creator demanding justice. Judge Hawthorne listened without interruption, taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, and when I finished, she turned to Marcus. "Do you have anything to say?" she asked. My son looked at me, and for a brief moment, I saw something in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or shame. But Vanessa touched his arm, and he looked away. "This is just business," he said, his voice flat. "My mother is making this personal when it's purely a professional dispute." Judge Hawthorne's expression didn't change, but I saw something harden in her gaze. "Purely professional," she repeated. "Mr. Grant, you asked your mother to build software that made your company worth over $1 billion. Then you attempted to claim sole ownership of her work through fraudulent misrepresentation. You discussed forcing her out in private communications while publicly praising her contributions. You showed her no respect, no gratitude, and no recognition. And you call this purely professional?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "The company's success is due to many factors." Judge Hawthorne raised her hand, cutting him off. "I've heard enough. I'll issue my decision within 2 weeks." Those 2 weeks felt like years. I went back to my daily routine. Morning coffee on the porch, walks through Laurelhurst, dinners with Sophie, who had extended her stay. But everything felt suspended, unreal, like I was living in a space between one life and another. Marcus continued calling, but the tone of his voicemails had changed, become less angry and more desperate. The company's potential buyers had backed out after learning about the arbitration, spooked by the legal uncertainty around intellectual property rights. Several key employees had resigned after word spread about how Marcus had treated me, unwilling to work for someone who would betray his own mother for profit. The venture capital firms that had invested were threatening to pull their funding, concerned about the ethical implications and the risk to their own reputations. Marcus's empire, built on my work and held together by deception, was crumbling, and he was finally beginning to understand what he had destroyed. Judge Hawthorne's decision arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered via email and certified mail, a 30-page document that systematically dismantled every argument Marcus's lawyers had made. She ruled that my proprietary library was legally my intellectual property, that the software built on that library was a derivative work over which I retained significant rights, and that the ownership reversion clause I had embedded in the licensing metadata was valid and enforceable. She found that Marcus and Vanessa had engaged in fraudulent misrepresentation when they coerced me into signing the transfer agreement, that they had violated basic principles of ethical business conduct, and that their actions constituted a breach of fiduciary duty. Her ruling granted me full ownership of the software and all related intellectual property, invalidated the transfer agreement I had signed under duress, and awarded me compensatory damages for emotional distress and reputational harm. More significantly, she ordered that the company could continue using the software only under a licensing agreement with me, the terms of which I would set, and that Marcus was required to publicly acknowledge my role as the software's creator in all corporate communications and marketing materials. The ruling was binding and final, with no avenue for appeal. I sat in my kitchen reading the decision 3 times, letting the words sink in, feeling something shift inside me that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't triumph, exactly, or vindication, though those emotions were present. It was more like reclamation, like I had taken back a piece of myself that had been stolen, like I had proven to myself that I was still strong, still valuable, still capable of fighting for what was mine. Sophie hugged me when I told her, crying tears of relief and pride. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe properly, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally lifted. That evening, Marcus called. Not from his office number, not with Vanessa coaching him in the background, but from his personal cell, alone. I answered, curious despite myself. "Mom," he said, and his voice was different, smaller, emptied of the corporate confidence and cold authority. "I need to talk to you." I waited, letting the silence stretch. "I made a mistake," he continued, "a huge mistake. I let Vanessa convince me that business was more important than family, that success meant being ruthless, that sentiment was weakness. I forgot what you and Dad taught me about integrity and loyalty and respect. I forgot that you're not just the person who built this company. You're my mother, and you deserve better than how I treated you. I'm so sorry." I listened to his words, analyzing them the way I would analyze code, looking for genuine patterns or just surface-level gestures. "Are you sorry because you hurt me?" I asked quietly. "Or because you got caught? Are you apologizing because you realized you were wrong, or because the arbitration ruling destroyed your plans?" Marcus was quiet for a long time. "Both," he admitted finally. "I'm sorry for what I did, and I'm sorry for how it ended. I don't know if that makes me a terrible person or just an honest one." I appreciated the honesty, even if it came too late. "Marcus, I forgave you the moment you were born," I said, and I realized as I spoke that it was true. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean allowing you to hurt me again. It doesn't mean pretending this didn't happen or that we can go back to how things were. You made choices that showed me who you've become, and I have to protect myself from that person." Marcus made a sound that might have been a sob. "Can we ever fix this? Can there ever be a relationship between us again?" I thought about that question for a long time, looking around my kitchen at the photos on the wall. Marcus as a baby, Marcus graduating college, Marcus and his father working together in the old office. "I don't know," I said honestly. "That depends on who you choose to be from here, whether you learn from this, whether you rebuild yourself into someone I can trust. But it won't be quick, and it won't be easy, and I won't compromise my dignity or my rights to make it happen. If you want a relationship with me, you'll have to earn it." We talked for another hour, a real conversation for the first time in years, and by the end, I didn't feel healed or reconciled, but I felt like maybe, someday, there might be a path forward. Not back to what we were, because that was gone forever, but towards something new, something built on truth instead of assumption, respect instead of exploitation. The licensing agreement I negotiated with the company gave me a substantial equity stake, a seat on the board with veto power over major decisions, and a percentage of all revenue generated by my software. Marcus remained CEO, but with significantly reduced authority and under the oversight of independent directors I helped select. Vanessa resigned, recognizing that her presence made any reconciliation impossible, and moved back to New York to join a different firm. The company's valuation stabilized once the ownership dispute was resolved, and several of the original buyers renewed their interest, though at more reasonable terms that acknowledged my contribution and protected my rights. I used part of my settlement to establish a scholarship fund in Thomas's name for women and underrepresented minorities pursuing computer science degrees, determined to create opportunities for others that I had to fight so hard to protect for myself. Sophie went back to Boston, but called me 3 times a week instead of just Sundays, and we grew closer through this experience, bound by a shared understanding of betrayal and survival and the complicated love we still felt for Marcus despite everything. Months have passed since the arbitration ruling, and my phone still occasionally lights up with calls from Marcus. though now they're invitations to lunch or requests for advice rather than demands and threats. Sometimes I answer, sometimes I don't, depending on how strong I feel that day, how willing I am to risk the fragile peace we've built. The company is doing well. The software continues to generate revenue and acclaim, and my name is now properly credited in patents and presentations and press releases. A small but significant acknowledgement that I was erased but refused to stay invisible. I still live in my craftsman house in Laurelhurst, still drink coffee on the front porch, still write code late into the night when inspiration strikes, but now I do it for myself, on projects I choose, with terms I control. I've learned that protecting yourself is not selfish, that setting boundaries is not cruel, that demanding respect is not unreasonable. I've learned that family is complicated, that love doesn't excuse betrayal, and that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones you have to love from a distance. I think about Thomas often, wonder what he would say about everything that happened, whether he would be proud of how I fought back or disappointed that it came to that at all. I think he would understand, would tell me I did the right thing, would remind me that business and family are separate things that should never be confused, even when they're intertwined. I think he would be sad about Marcus, about the choices our son made, but he would also be hopeful, always the optimist, believing that people can change and grow and find their way back to who they're supposed to be. I'm less certain, more cautious, but I haven't given up entirely. Sophie tells me that's growth, that I'm learning to protect my heart while still keeping it open, and maybe she's right. What would you do if the person you trusted most betrayed you for profit? Would you fight back, or would you accept the loss and walk away? Would you forgive, or would you draw a line and refuse to cross it? I don't have easy answers to these questions, and I'm not sure anyone does. What I know is that I built something valuable with my own hands and mind, that I was willing to share it with my son because I loved him, and that when he tried to take it from me through deception and manipulation, I refused to let him erase me. I know that sometimes protecting yourself is not selfish, it is survival, it is dignity, it is the difference between being a victim and being a survivor. I know that I am 71 years old, that I have lived through loss and betrayal and heartbreak, and that I am still here, still creating, still fighting for what matters. And I know that my story is not unique, that somewhere there are others who have been betrayed by the people they love most, who have been told they are worthless or outdated or in the way, and I want them to know that they are not alone, that they have value, that they deserve respect and recognition and justice. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to be destroyed by those who claim to love you. Sometimes survival means building walls where you once built bridges. And sometimes the most important code you'll ever write is the one that protects your own heart from those who would exploit it.